Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you for being here. We're very excited to do the very first session of the inaugural Global C.R.E.D conference. Thank you, Linda, for that great introduction. Thank you for joining us for today's Career Readiness panel. Today, we'll be speaking with 4 different panelists that use Arabic in a variety of different roles. My name is Omar Tarabishi, and I am the Program Officer for Arabic Language Programs at Qatar Foundation International. A little bit about Qatar Foundation International. We do work in 3 different program areas: connected communities, Arab societies and cultures, as well as Arabic language. QFI is a member of Qatar Foundation for education, science, and community development. And part of our mission is to foster global competency and create a greater understanding through the exploration of Arab societies and cultures, as well as Arabic language. I'm joined by 4 fantastic panelists today, and when we were approached by Global C.R.E.D about possibly doing a session on Arabic, we thought, why not hear from Arabic speakers themselves, those that have learned the language, taken the language, studied it in school and in higher ed, and in different programs, such as study abroad programs and summer programs. And they represent a variety of different roles, some of them teachers, some of them entrepreneurs, some of them who have done even previous roles using their Arabic language skills. So I want to just do some small introductions and have them introduce themselves. We'll start with Sara Rangwala.
Hi, my name is Sara Rangwala. I am a high school Arabic teacher, and I've also worked with foundations that support refugees in our community in the US and St. Louis specifically.
Thank you, Sarah. Next, we have Emilie Zuniga. Emilie?
Hi, my name is Emilie Zuniga. I was a professor of Arabic, and I am currently working as the Arabic language expert for Duolingo.
Next, we have Jordan Gerstler-Holton.
Hi, my name is Jordan Gerstler-Holton. I currently live in Luxembourg, and I work for a small NGO here called Touchpoints. We mainly help refugees in Luxembourg start their own businesses. So I speak Arabic every day and work mostly with, I work from Arabs from all over, Syrians, Iraqis, Palestinians. And I'm also a founder of playling.com. It's a website, check it out. It's a tool for learning Arabic. Basically, you have a bunch of content from YouTube, and you can click on different words and see interactive captioning.
Thanks a lot, Jordan. And last but not least, we have Hayley Smith.
Hello. I'm Hayley Smith. I am the founder and director of Lifting Hands International. It is an international nonprofit organization that provides humanitarian aid to refugees, both at home and abroad. I also taught Arabic at Boston Latin Academy for a couple of years. It's near and dear to my heart.
Thanks a lot, Hayley. Thank you for joining us, to the 4 of you. Really, we're really excited to speak with you and to give an opportunity for language learners to hear from you and your journey and your Arabic language, experience going from beginning to end. What we'll be doing today, I sent the panelists about 7 questions to kind of think about. So we'll be going through those questions today. We will be monitoring the comments. So if you do have any questions that we hopefully will have time for at the end, we'd love to pose those questions to our panelists as well. Of course, time permitting. So I guess to start us off, really take us back to the very beginning. What first tempted you to take an Arabic language course? And then what was the moment you realized that you'd be striving towards a high level of fluency? How did you know that you're going to continue until you possibly get to advanced high or superior level or a higher level of fluency? Emilie, I wanted to start with you.
Sure. Happy to answer this question. So I was born and raised in southern France, where there is a fairly large community of people from North Africa or of North African origin. And so for me, growing up, I had a number of friends in school whose parents were typically either from Morocco or from Algeria or from Tunisia. And so I was very aware of some of the most salient aspects of North African culture. When I got to college, this is like years and years later, I was a linguistics major, and I was asked to register for some non-Indo-European languages. And so I thought about the options that I had, and I tried Swahili at first. It was fun, but the university I was at had a really solid Arabic program, and I ended up taking Arabic, thinking of my friends, especially my friends from middle school, and having that interest in mind, and it opened up a whole new world to me, frankly. And when I decided that I was going to be fluent at the end of my undergrad, I had had 2 years of Arabic, and I had done a short study abroad in Jordan. And one of my old professors reached out and said, hey, there's this scholarship opportunity for grad school. You should look into it. When I decided to apply for grad school in Arabic linguistics is when I decided, I'm going to do this thing. Because I kind of had a love-hate relationship with Arabic where I really liked it, but I found it more difficult than some other languages I had succeeded at before. And so I related it to my experience with German, where I love German, but I also don't feel super comfortable with it. And that day is when I said, I'm gonna become something in Arabic. I'm gonna do something with this language.
And actually, we didn't go over this. How many languages do all of you speak? Emilie, how many languages?
I speak a number of them. It's always tricky to define what fluency really is, because things vary. It depends on how much you've been practicing a language. But I have been highly proficient and certainly fluent in 7 languages over the course of my lifetime. I grew up monolingual, but yeah, I speak. So French is my native language, English, Arabic, Greek, modern Greek, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, those are the 7. And then I have a strong intermediate degree of proficiency in Turkish, as well as beginner proficiency in a number of other languages, Hebrew, Maltese, and some more that I'm leaving out.
Wow. Jordan, actually, I wanted to turn it over to you since you created playling.com and you're really in there with the different dialects and the different types of Arabic. Also, and you're living in Luxembourg. Are you proficient in some other languages as well?
Yeah, I mean, I also use French a lot at work in Luxembourg. It's mostly French is probably the dominant language, although there's a few national languages. And I also, I studied in Israel. I spent about 1.5 years in Israel. I studied Hebrew in college, so I speak Hebrew, although it's a bit rusty now, and in Italian as well. I also spent 1 year in Italy.
For Sarah and Hayley, I wanted to ask you as well, how did you start your Arabic journey? What really inspired that? Take us back to the beginning, before that first class. What made you take the first class? Maybe Sarah, you can start.
Sure. I wanted to learn French really bad in high school, and I just was awful at it. So when I got to college, I think I also, like Emilie said, grew up monolingual to a certain degree, and really wanted to study and learn another language well. And so when I got to college, I thought maybe let's do a 180 and try something really different. And I signed up for Arabic, and then it just went from there. I really liked it.
And do you speak any other language other than Arabic and English?
I agree, again, with Emilie that proficiency is kind of difficult to measure, but I really enjoy learning languages. And so I've been learning to different degrees, Persian, Spanish, Hindi, and Urdu.
Very nice, very nice. Hayley, take us back. I know that you were a teacher in Boston for quite some time before starting Lifting Hands International.
Yeah, I discovered Arabic the last year of my college experience. And so I ended up staying in college for a little longer. It was one of those situations where I was a little bit lost. I'm not going to lie. I was majoring in English because I just didn't know what else to do. And I love literature and I love travel and things like that. And I just thought it would be a good match. But by the time I was a senior in college, I had zero passion for my major. And I decided to, I don't know, I was feeling really lost, not just academically, but personally too. So actually one day I was feeling pretty depressed. I'm not going to lie. And so this was a long time ago. I'm good now. But I went to the library with the sole purpose of just being distracted, finding a book and just sitting down and just learning a foreign alphabet. I thought that would be a good distraction.
Yeah.
So I went to the language section and I just picked a book out, and it happened to be an Arabic book, how to learn the Arabic alphabet. And so I sat down and I learned the alphabet, how to write it. I mean, that very day. I spent hours doing it, and it just captured my imagination. And I just knew from the second I opened the book and was perusing it, I just knew that this was going to be a part of my life. It's kind of like falling in love. It was like love at first sight. Like, ooh, like if you see someone like, oh, that person's going to be a part of my life. It was the same with the language. I've never experienced anything like that before or since. And so I ended up staying another year at college, and half of that was in Morocco. So I learned a little bit of the Moroccan dialect, which is useful if you're in Morocco. But it was a wonderful experience. It set me on like a trajectory that just catapulted me out of my dark place and into just the most amazing journey. So yeah, I ended up, it's crazy. I got a master's degree in Middle Eastern studies, and then I moved to Egypt by myself and just wandered around the city for 4 months and met people and just practiced Egyptian Arabic until I ran out of money. And then I came home and became a teacher for a couple of years before I ended up teaching Arabic. And so I taught Arabic for a couple of years and loved it, and just wanted to come and be closer to my family. So I moved closer to my family only to start a nonprofit and just travel for most of the time for the last 5 years. But it's been amazing. I use Arabic a lot, and I work with a lot of Syrians when I'm in Jordan, but I also work mostly with Yazidi refugees. So Yazidis are like they're not Christian or Muslim, but they're a monotheistic ethnic minority from the north part of Iraq. And they experienced a genocide in 2014, and lots of them have made it to Greece, where they're just living in camps for years on end until they get resettled and join a diaspora, probably in Germany or the Netherlands. So I've learned a little bit of Kurmanji. It's a dialect of Kurdish, and it's really hard, but it's fun. Yeah, that's my journey so far.
That's really great to hear. I didn't know it was that spontaneous of just pulling a book off the shelf and just diving right in. But hey, that's one way. That's one way to do it. That's really great. And as a natural transition, you mentioned that you talked about studying abroad in Morocco, moving to Egypt, and I know that Sarah and Jordan also have studied abroad as well. But I wanted to ask you all, maybe starting with Hayley, you. So what aspect do you think is most important to you in the language learning journey? I know that many aspects are important, but if we're talking like a book, teacher, culture, grammar, studying abroad, speaking practice, what is if you had to pick one, what's the most important aspect for that language learning journey for you? Go ahead, Hayley.
Oh my goodness, this is such a good question. You have to find what helps you. And I mean, I've been speaking Arabic for years, and obviously it takes a lot to become fluent. And I've resisted, for a number of years, I resisted becoming fluent because whenever I tried to study or read the news or something, I just got really discouraged. Like, I don't know this vocab, and like, it just makes me feel stupid. And so I would just avoid it. But then I knew that I absorbed a lot of Arabic if I'm around people or if I'm listening to stuff. And so I discovered that just listening and being around people and just talking is like, it elevated my fluency big time. And even now I'm taking a break. So I'm actually in the States for a couple of months, and I've just been watching Jordanian comedies all day long. And so my mom will be cooking in the kitchen and I'll be like, but I listen to them and I understand it. Whereas if I were to be sitting all day and studying bbcarabic.co.uk, I wouldn't pick anything up. And so you just have to find what you love and really go for it.
That's right. Listening for sure. Surrounding yourself, listening, shows, things that are going to, naturally kind of spark joy and make you smile and make you actually get connected with something that's positive. That's really true. Sarah, Emilie, Jordan, please feel free to chime in. What aspect do you think really is something that captures that Arabic language, that keeps you there and that helps you excel? Good, Sarah.
I would agree 100% with Hayley. Immersion for me really helped. And I think that's important too, because immersion helps you learn not just the language, but how it's used. And with Arabic specifically, I think that's very important. The nuances of the language, the body language, all of that's really important.
Emilie, Jordan?
I would say yes. So to echo what Hayley and Sarah have said, of course, immersion has been a really important element of my journey in becoming proficient in Arabic. I will say, however, that it's so personal and it is so based on your own preferences and abilities and your emotional state. And so immersion has sometimes been really overwhelming for me. And in an effort to find some grounding, I have found it useful. Two things that are really important to me is finding a person, finding somebody who is some sort of anchor for you. So it could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be someone who is native to the target culture, so say Arabic culture, that you can create some form of bond with, some form of relationship with. That has been really helpful to me, both in terms of language acquisition and also in terms of cultural acquisition. And the second thing for me that's really important in my language learning journey is an opportunity to spend some time abroad and to really gain a different understanding of the culture.
Yeah, certainly being in the environment, seeing it around you, hearing it around you, of course, that's certainly true. Jordan, we do have one comment. Could someone share the link to the website that Jordan mentioned? I believe that's Playing.
Yes, correct. Where do I share it in the chat, or I mean?
We can share it in the chat, and perhaps someone on the admin team can share it in the comments. That's playalink.com. My next question I wanted to direct towards Sarah and Emilie, and even Hayley. I know Hayley served was a teacher in the past. If you could change one thing about current Arabic education, what would it be? Emilie, if we could start with you.
Sure. So thank you for that question. So as I mentioned before, I have a PhD in Arabic, and I was a professor of Arabic. I also I've had a chance to work with a number of different study abroad programs over the years. I served as the director of the University of Utah Study Abroad in Alexandria, Egypt, back in 2008. Director of the Critical Language Scholarship study abroad in Amman, Jordan, 2010. And I was also an academic consultant for Arabic Flagship for their year abroad in Morocco just last year. And one thing that I've noticed, even in those programs that take students abroad and that really provide them with a really good structure in terms of language and cultural learning, what I've noticed is that students abroad tend to not learn quite as much about the culture as you might like to think. And so it takes a strong sort of programmatic intervention for students to actually acquire any culture and make any kind of progress on that sort of journey from I'm a monolingual, monocultural person to I have learned what it means to function well in two or multiple different cultures. What anthropologists call cultural relativism. That journey is a long one, and it is not linear. It's a crazy one, and it's got spirals and ups and downs and a lot of work on processing both positive and negative cultural experiences that you have with the target culture. And so I would say the main thing I would change in language education is a much, much greater focus on that journey of self-discovery, that journey of understanding one's culture in order to be able to understand a foreign culture. Instead of just focusing on the language or doing culture in like, here's a snippet. Arabs in the Gulf like to do this. Well, instead of that, let's reframe this in a complete cultural journey in which language is an important element.
Yeah, no, I think that's really important. Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
Oh, I absolutely do. So I can't speak to language education in other countries because I've only really taught or experienced it here in the US. But I think in general in the United States, our language education does not focus on speaking at all. And which is, for many of us, the primary way that we communicate. And so it doesn't make sense that we're filling out worksheets in verb conjugation because it doesn't help us actually practice and achieve fluency in speaking. And that's actually one of the reasons I studied French for 5 or 6 years, and I cannot really form a sentence. And so I think that there needs to be a larger focus on speaking in the classroom. And I also find in this country, we focus very much on grammar in general, again, in language education, but especially in standard Arabic. That doesn't, for me, if you're ultimately, your goal in achieving fluency is a large part of that is speaking. I find that the heavy focus on grammar, especially in standard Arabic, is really daunting and really off-putting oftentimes to students as well. And that just kind of gets in the way, again, of achieving fluency and really, I think, showing students what all there is to learn, not just about the culture, not just about the language, but the different communities in which Arabic is spoken.
I think that's a really great point. I mean, we've heard this story, time and time again, the Arabic student that travels abroad and starts to speak Fusha. And because they put in so much time and so much effort in the book and they memorize the grammar, but what about speaking practice? There's no speaking. And it turns out, we don't even speak using Fusha. So some more speaking practice certainly is needed. Hayley, I don't know if you wanted to chime in on this question as well.
I think in my own experience, I think that, there's, especially in the United States, with the uphill battle of overcoming stereotypes and of many cultures, not just Arab culture. When I taught Arabic, I made sure that the room was decorated in all kinds of really cool things, and traditional stuff and also modern stuff, just to show them like they're the same as you. I spent a summer in Jordan making little movies about teenagers there, and I would show them to my students and they'd be like, oh my gosh, like they like the same things I do. Yes, yes, they do. And it kind of like that whole thing has translated to like my job, for example. I spend a lot of time with refugees, and obviously they're the same as us. And I feel like, with fundraising and awareness and running a nonprofit, I find that most of my job is to humanize humans, which doesn't feel very good at all. I constantly have to remind people like they're the same as us. But I think if that starts in Arabic education, you can overcome that. Even my own experience when I first went to Morocco, it was like, I'm embarrassed to say this, but I lived in this old neighborhood in Fez, Morocco. And it was like, everything's so old and so cool. And it was like Disneyland. But in reality, people who live there are living in abject poverty. And even I would look at the little trash donkeys, because they put the trash on donkeys, and they'd be like, that's so cute. But in reality, that guy who's doing that is probably trying desperately to make ends meet. And so by the end of the study abroad, I was living with a couple, like a Moroccan couple. By the end, it was like, they're the same as me. And that's definitely the number one thing that has made the most impact in my work, is sitting down with refugees and talking to them. And they aren't used to someone coming in who looks like me, who speaks Arabic. And they're not used to telling their stories. And so oftentimes when we're in Jordan, going from camp to camp, little tiny camps, distributing goats for milk, we'll sit in their tents, and especially the women will be like, I have to tell you my story, please. And it's because they haven't been able to tell their story. And so we'll be sitting there drinking tea, and they'll be telling me about all these horrific things that happened to them, and also good things that happened to them, because they're very positive and resilient people in general. But that's what makes the difference, is sitting there together and knowing that they're my brothers and sisters, and being able to tell them, you are my sister. It's it's life-changing for me, and hopefully it changes, and it gives them, hopefully it changes their day and gives them something to smile about.
Yeah, I think really, even in education, letting young students know that this, that the people abroad, the people in the Arab world also have the same interests. And I mean, there's been a number of different movies and films that have come out, documentaries even, very specific interests like skateboarders in Jordan, surfers in Palestine, female car drifters, like streetcar drifting, racing, things that people here will open their eyes and say, "Oh wait, well I love surfing. I didn't know they love to surf there. Oh, I don't know they love to drift cars there." And that's it, making that connection between the Arab world and the West. That there are connections, there are similarities, and that's important. That's important to do, certainly in the classroom. To go to the next question, I wanted to talk about, let's say, students they studied Arabic, they want to include their Arabic skills on the resume. How do you show your Arabic skills on the resume in hopes that you would get something or get a position for in the workplace? How can students include the Arabic skills on their resume? Sarah, maybe we can start with you.
Sorry, I had to unmute. I think there's a lot of, especially for students coming from the US, there's a lot of solid programs out there, like Middlebury, Fulbright, CASA, that look good on resumes, to be honest. And I think also working or living abroad is also always helpful, but highlighting the fact that you have, like many of us have talked about, been involved in the community that you've lived in whatever capacity, I think is also really helpful, because it shows, again, that you not only know the language, but you have a deep understanding of the people that you've lived or studied with.
I wanted to ask just a question in general to the four panelists here. Are there any, like, I know that there's ACTFL, ILR levels and standards and numbers and ratings. Do you include that on the resume for our young listeners, for our young learners, when they take a certified OPI and they get a certain score? Is that something that they can include on the resume and that perhaps employers will recognize? Emilie, I saw that you unmuted.
I would say absolutely. Include anything on the resume that can show your proficiency in any way. So if you have taken an OPI and you're not ashamed of your score, then include it on the resume. If you have studied abroad, include it on the resume. If you have invested of your time or money to get private tutoring, include it on the resume. And I would say, to go back to Omar's last question about how to sort of showcase your proficiency on a resume, one thing that I've really liked when I've seen applications or have been on boards to either pick students for scholarships or give a former student an opportunity for employment, one thing that really speaks to me is a video. And there's a number of different, the resume is sort of like typically just sort of a piece of paper or a PDF doc that you kind of glimpse at. What I've appreciated is a link that would take me to either a YouTube video or a website or anything, a different kind of medium that portrays the applicant through like a little snippet where they either perform a language function or present original research, depending on the kind of program that you've been through. I'm not suggesting that you have to do your own research and make a video of yourself presenting it, but say if you were in a cohort of Arabic flagship and you did the year abroad, the capstone year abroad in Morocco, and your final year presentation was recorded, I would include that for job applications for scholarships, because it's a powerful way for the employer to get to know you and understand what you can perform for them in the target language.
I think that's a really good point, Emilie. That kind of makes me think of at the end of my first year studying Arabic, always the final project was a skit. And some of the groups went above and beyond and made like short films, like 45 minutes, with harakat and i'rab, and like everything was they subtitled it. I mean, really, at that point, yeah, if you have something such high quality, is, you know, and you're really proud of it, of course, include it. That, you know, this is my final project for this class, or, you know, intermediate, advanced, beginner, whatever. But to prove and to show your Arabic skills, that's true. Including a link to YouTube, to something that you filmed, something that you submitted as a final project, and you're proud of it. That's a really good point. To go to the next question, I wanted to ask. So let's say you've graduated with an Arabic degree. You're applying to jobs, but you're getting no luck. How can you keep up your Arabic skills while waiting for the right employment opportunity? So you're out of school, you're no longer studying it formally. What are some great ways to keep up? I know we mentioned Playling, we talked about Playling. Are there any other ways that students can keep up their high level of Arabic skills while they're waiting, while they're kind of passing the time? I wanted to start with Sarah.
I would say that I've used a number of different organizations, and there's a few out there that connect language learners with people who are in different countries as refugees, which is often helpful because sometimes that can be one of the only sources of income that they receive. And so Netkalam is one that offers people an opportunity to learn Arabic or French, or I think Spanish and Persian are among their offerings as well. But if you're in the United States, and I imagine a number of other countries as well, you know, we have a number of people who have come over here as refugees as well. And if that is something, you know, that genuinely interests you, building community or connections with people who have come here as refugees, I think that there are, you know, a lot of organizations in different cities that you can get involved in. But I also think it's very important to make sure that your interest is genuine, because I do know that, you know, there have been a number of students and people that I've worked with that kind of reach out to people who are here as refugees solely to gain from them and to, you know, learn Arabic from them, and not actually build, you know, help build community. And I think in the United States, that's especially important because our government, unfortunately, does not offer a lot of support for people who come here as refugees. And so oftentimes becoming a part of the community wherever they are is difficult, and sometimes they find themselves isolated. And so that can be a really mutually beneficial relationship, again, if that's something that's genuinely interesting to you.
I think that's a really good point. Netkalam, you know, we work, Qatar Foundation International works closely also with Netkalam. We provide opportunities for students to, you know, even classrooms to have a displaced person or a refugee speak and be kind of like, what's the word, beamed in, you know, via Skype or Zoom, and speak to the students and give them an opportunity to really share. Hayley, you mentioned it earlier. I mean, you know, you're surrounding yourself with you know, Jordanian dialect shows, and you're laughing, you know, and I think that's also another thing, you know, just to mention that we watch a lot of Netflix now. We do a lot of, you know, we spend a lot of time on streaming. Take a look at Netflix, because there are a lot of Arab series and a lot of Arabic movies that have been put on Netflix and other streaming services. If you're looking to improve your listening skills, maybe work on another dialect, there are avenues there, you know, things that we're doing every day anyways in English. Well, why not put on Arabic subtitles? Why not, you know, listen to it or watch it in Arabic? Those are opportunities. There are opportunities here and there as well. Did anyone else want to chime in on that question? What are some ways that that students can kind of keep up their Arabic skills while applying, while looking for jobs? Hayley, I know you unmuted.
Yeah, I have to admit that there was a period of time that I didn't keep it up. And a lot of it had to do with, right, like feeling stupid. Whenever I tried to do it, I felt like I just didn't feel very smart. It wasn't sticking, and so I just stopped. Which I obviously regret, and I've made up for it, luckily. But at the same time, I took advantage. I was doing my master's at the time in Middle Eastern Studies, not Arabic, Middle East, just different aspects, and learning history, watching films, like the good films, like the artists, you know, what do you call it? The directors that are really famous for these beautiful films that have so much meaning. I took advantage of that. So I learned a lot of history of the Arab world and a lot of films and things like that, poetry translated into English. but that also helped when I started like really trying to like get my Arabic better again. I had that foundation where I could connect with people, and I would mention this movie, or I'd mention some explorer from the 1500s or something, and that would help us connect. So I actually had something to talk about, and they were very impressed that I knew that stuff. So don't leave that out either.
I wanted to mention, of course, I've experienced this as well, graduating from it with an Arabic degree, but still looking for that first work opportunity. And that coming from a heritage speaking family, I forced, and it was a change to speak to my parents in Arabic. I've always spoken to them in English, but I forced myself, I just came back from Egypt. I need to use my Arabic. I need to use my skills. And also my friends. So the friends that participated in that program that returned to the US, it's very easy to get back into the habit of speaking to them in English, but no, I would force myself to speak in Arabic and use the words and try to circumvent and get around that one word that I keep missing, that I keep forgetting. I'll eventually just describe it so well that they know what I'm talking about. And that's another skill. That's another way to keep up those Arabic skills, is put yourself in a position to keep using it, whether it's with speakers, whether it's with other language learners. And to give a quick shout out to Jordan and Playling. And when I was first introduced to Jordan and took a look at that website, I really spent a long time jumping from video to video and almost going down the rabbit hole of even some dialects that I'm not familiar with, starting with some beginner level videos to just get exposure and just to hear maybe some similarities between dialects, or to pick out the words, the key words that are, oh, well, that's different in this dialect. Well, I didn't know that. And to kind of go from there. So really being proactive, taking a look online, using your resources and using those who are around you to keep up those Arabic skills. That language learning is a lifelong journey. You're never complete. You never have the check mark that you're done. There's always something new to learn. And specifically with Arabic, with the different dialects and the different regions, there's always something that can be learned. There's always something that can be improved upon. The next question I wanted to take it to, I wanted to ask, with starting with Jordan and Sarah, what was the hardest aspect of language for you during your studies? What was the hardest part to wrap your head? I know for me, certainly it was grammar. Coming from a heritage-speaking household, I always float to Egyptian dialect, and when I get to Fusha, I get really mixed up with the rules and the regulations and the different grammar and the nahu and the harakat, the i'rab. So for Sarah and Jordan, maybe Jordan, you can start us off. What was the toughest part of Arabic for you?
Yeah, for me, I wouldn't say it was so much the grammar. Well, I mean, the grammar is difficult, but a lot of the MSA grammar, when I first started learning it, I kind of approached it unconventionally. I didn't start learning in a course. I started learning on my own with an Iraqi, and then I found an Iraqi tutor, and we were meeting, and then I started traveling. I was in Morocco, and then I was in the West Bank, and then I was 4 years in Egypt. And all that time, I kind of, I'd already studied other languages before that. I really knew that I wanted to achieve a kind of proficiency, and I wasn't interested in this kind of, at the time, I didn't even feel like it was important to really absorb a lot of the MSA grammar stuff that I saw in the textbooks. I would just skip over that. There's no test for me. I wasn't in college anymore, so it didn't really matter. So I found, the most difficult thing about it was really pronunciation for me, especially among the different, because I moved so much between different dialects constantly. My own way of speaking changed over time. It was a constant kind of mix of different things going on. And I would sort of second guess myself and get confused about the vowels. And sometimes I was right about both versions. It's just I didn't remember which went with which, or maybe one I just made up and the other one was, So there was that constant ambiguity, which I even still experience, to be honest with you. I deal with Arabs from all over. So it's really a constant juggling game about how I'm going to speak to make myself understood, and you see them themselves adjusting their own speech as well to what they suspect I would more easily understand.
That's very true. That's very, very true. Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to chime in.
I think initially the hardest part was just speaking. Like I said, even in college when I was learning Arabic, we barely spoke in the classroom. And so getting over that obstacle of just lack of self-confidence in my language was really difficult. And Omar, like you said earlier, when I stayed abroad in Egypt, and when I first got there, I stayed at a cheap hotel. And nobody around me spoke English, and nobody understood what I was saying because I was speaking in modern standard Arabic the whole time because I hadn't started learning any dialects. And that was really the first couple of days I was in Egypt. I cried myself to bed every night because I couldn't find food. I just didn't know where to go. I was in the middle of Cairo. I had no idea where I was, and nobody could understand me. And that just made it even more difficult. I was like, I've been studying this language for 3 years. Nobody knows what I'm saying. What have I been doing? Who gave me A's? Because they really misled me into thinking I knew this language, but I really don't. Once I got over that, it's incredible. I feel so much more confident attempting in the other languages that I'm learning as well. And that's a really great feeling because, I think with anything, you really have to put yourself out there and practice until you get better. But languages, for sure, you don't just start speaking one day. It comes with practice. And I think with Arabic especially, that can be daunting once you realize all the dialects that exist, and often sometimes the very large differences that exist between them. And for my students as well, that's often really challenging once they discover that, okay, I can speak well in my teacher's class, but once I meet Arabs, like when they go out on the street, when I was teaching in Boston, there were a lot of Moroccans, and I taught Egyptian Arabic. And some students would come back and they would be like, what are you teaching me? Nobody, I don't understand what anybody is saying to me. But I think that, you pick it up over time and you really, especially with Arabic, you stay the course. And it helped to remind myself that, sometimes Arabs from different regions don't have the smoothest communication either. So it's not just me. And it's also with Arabic too, because, the Arabic speaking world is located in between all of these different continents and civilizations and cultures and communities. You start to notice the way that the different languages and dialects converge. And that is really cool. Like that, I personally find the way languages and history have interacted over time super neat. And so it's become less of a daunting thing where I'm like, why don't I understand people, to why don't I understand people? What was it about history that has changed this language? And that's really, really fun to learn about.
That's certainly true. I don't know if I wanted to give the opportunity for anyone else to chime in before we get to our last and final question. We have a lot of language learners that are learning Arabic that haven't started learning Arabic. So this last question is kind of just when you get into school, you have the opportunity of taking French, taking Spanish, and some other critical languages that might be in school. Okay, maybe Mandarin, maybe even Korean. Why should students take Arabic, or why should they continue taking Arabic? And I'm going to start with Hayley.
Like I mentioned before, bridging the gap between the culture gap, showing people that you're willing to learn about their culture and their language is huge. Like I can't emphasize that enough. I have met thousands of people displaced by war, and I haven't spoken to all of them, right? But I've spoken to several. And again, like the connection that they're able to speak in their own language and tell the story in their own language is huge for them. And oftentimes, like they'll cry and they'll hug me and they'll just be like, thank you for listening. Like if someone's hugging you and crying and thanking you for listening, that's indicative that they're not getting enough of that. And I think like even just as when I was a teacher in Boston, like my students were amazing, but like, yeah, at the beginning, a lot of them just didn't know why they were in there. They were kind of like, well, I don't know, I didn't want to take Spanish. And so there was that kind of, they just didn't have, there was that gap. They just didn't understand what they were getting into. But by the end, they were really connected to the language and to the teenagers they met on a little YouTube channel that I had made. Yeah, that's like, I can't emphasize that enough. It makes people feel so happy. Like even in the States, during Ramadan, I was walking somewhere in Arizona and I passed by a mahajaba. She was a lady wearing a hijab. So I figured she's probably fasting. And so I said, Ramadan Kareem. And she stopped and she's like, thank you. Like, no one has ever wished me that. Just, I was at the gym once and I saw someone there who I could tell that she was an Arabic speaker. I could just tell. Anyway, I talked to her. I said, hey, like, it turns out that she was a Syrian refugee and was just really happy to talk to me. And because I'd lived in the Middle East and had that exposure to culture, stopping someone on the street and talking to them is not weird for them. And so I think a lot of times I would never stop like someone else who's working out and be like, hey, are you from Louisiana? Or like, I would never do something like that. But because I know that you can, they're so open and so friendly that like it kind of throws them off at first because they're not used to it when they live in the American culture and people aren't so friendly. Just little things like that. I think it just makes people's days, like, it's a way to help people. It's a way to make people feel better, and it's all based on language. So that's my plug.
No, certainly. And we have a couple comments here. Thank you for sharing humanity of language, really connecting with another person and speaking to them in their language, showing that you understand, they're welcome, and that's certainly important. Sarah, Emilie, Jordan, I wanted to open it up to you as well. Why, if a student has the choice between, let's say, three, Emilie, you speak French, Jordan, you speak French, but if they have the option between taking French, Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic, why should they choose Arabic? What can you say to that? Go ahead, Emilie.
Thank you. Maybe this isn't the answer you're looking for. I think they don't have to take Arabic, first of all. I just want to point out the fact that everybody's life experience priorities are unique and different. And I think you should make the choice that makes the most sense to you and do the thing that excites you the most, that brings the most happiness and the most connectivity to your life. And if that's not Arabic, then that's okay. I do think, though, that learning a foreign language is absolutely critical in anyone's life journey. And of course, I'm not speaking in a social vacuum. Like I was trained as a sociolinguist, and I'm a hyper polyglot. Like obviously learning and teaching language is really important to me. And that's probably why I say these things. I don't know that everyone in the world would agree with me. But I remember reading in a book years ago. This isn't a whole lot of information. I can dig out the reference if needed. But I remember reading about the experience of a high school German teacher who was teaching German in the Midwest somewhere in a really small town, far from everything, where people tended to just kind of stay in the hometown for the rest of their life and find work there. And the teacher was talking about an experience she had speaking with some parents of her high school German students. And the parents were saying, well, why should my kid even take your class? Why does that even matter? They're not ever going to leave this town. Why would they need to speak German? And she said, because your kid is never going to leave this town, that is exactly why they should take German. Because this is their only opportunity to open themselves up to the world and to learn about different worldviews through their study of this language and this culture. And so I think this is true for everyone in the world. The more we are open to learning languages and learning about other people's cultures, the richer our life can be, and the richer in terms of connectivity as well, and relationships. And I will say that in spite of the fact that this is my general view of things, you don't have to do Arabic. Personally, my connection to Arabic is very personal, and it comes from mostly from the year that I spent in Damascus as a CASA student, the relationship I have with some of my old Syrian friends are some of the most joyful and beautiful friendships that I have had a chance to develop in my life. So for me, it's that connection to Syrian culture, and in particular, the culture of Damascus, that just draws me back over and over. And so to anyone who's curious about that, if some of our listeners are curious, get out there, get into the culture, and see if you're not completely won over by the warmth and hospitality of most Arabs. And I'm not saying all Arabs have to be hospitable and kind. It's not their duty. I don't want to make this, sort of positive stereotype a burden to them. However, it is true that it is a cultural tendency that is found among many Arabs.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Emilie. Sarah Jordan, if Sarah, you are teaching Arabic. If a student asks you, why should I continue or why should I start? What do you have to give? What do you have to give them?
I, like Hayley, actually had a lot of students. I taught, the last high school I taught at was, we only offered Spanish and Arabic, and everybody wanted to take Spanish because they wanted an easy A, because there's this perception about Arabic that it's really difficult. And so that is something I encountered a lot. Students were put in my class because there was no space in the Spanish class. And I think, to speak to something Emilie said earlier about learning about your own culture and who you are, I think that happened a lot in my classroom. One of the first things we talk about in the first week is this idea of Arabic being written backwards. And we have a conversation about what the connotations of the word backwards mean, especially in in the United States, of our perception and our exposure to Arabs. And so, through that conversation, students just start to learn about themselves, their own perceptions, their own usage of the language that is their mother tongue. And then we go on, I think, like Emilie said, any language you want to learn, I think language learning is so important. But Arabic, I've seen in a lot of the students that I've had in the United States, just kind of flips their worldview 180. To Hayley's point, there are so many, we're all humans, there's so many similarities and we don't see that. But there's also so many ways of doing things that, in the United States, we definitely have a lot of people and a lot of cultures and a lot of worlds represented here, but there's a tendency to kind of gravitate towards the dominant culture. You want to seem as American as possible. And so things like the different ways that you can greet each other in the Arab world, in the US, you shake hands, and my students are really, sometimes, to be honest, off-put at the idea of kissing or getting that close to people physically. But I think the important thing is, especially here in the United States, there are multiple ways of doing things and saying things and just being, and you learn that from learning any language, because you're not just learning the language, you're learning about that community of people.
I think that's very, very appropriate for the global CR.E.D. All languages really, just opening up more than just Arabic, that's this natural progression that we're having towards a more global and interconnected world. What the likelihood of you running into someone who speaks another language, from a different culture, who's perhaps an immigrant, perhaps someone not born in the US, coming from abroad, is increasing. And even to take it one step further, once graduating, your percentage of working in a multicultural workforce or a diverse company or diverse organization increases. And so the ability, with another language, with the understanding of partial or another culture, that connection can happen. And just to speak to Hayley's point, of course, the humanity of it, to connect with another human being in their own language and to understand and to be able to relate is certainly appreciated. Jordan, I just wanted to give you also an opportunity if you wanted to chime in for that last question.
Yeah, related to the choice of languages, that's the question, right? Yeah. Yeah, for me, all of the languages I ever learned, except for French, because I started learning that in high school, because you had to choose between French and Spanish, so I chose French. But all the rest I chose because I had a very specific goal in mind, and that goal was to actually go to these places and live with these people. And so for me to, in the back of my mind, is like if I wanted to fully experience that, and then I needed to speak their language. And so, but also, I mean, I understand other people come across it in different ways. And Hayley's story about just pulling a random book out and just seeing the words, obviously, that was just love for the language itself. It wasn't a means to an end. It was an end in and of itself, which is interesting. People approach, I suppose, have different motivations for learning languages. But for me, it was always a means. It wasn't an end in itself. I mean, there are things that I appreciate about Arabic as being beautiful and whatnot, but it's all, I mean, it's not enough to, I think, counteract the suffering associated with spending years of of hard work, learning it, if it was just for that and not for the more important thing for me, which is really the people and the culture and the society.
Yeah, that's great. We do have about 4 minutes left. I wanted to open it up to comments to see if there's any questions for our panelists. We do have a couple more minutes. I know there was of course there was a comment. I wanted to mention this. Include, students that do obtain the seal of biliteracy. Of course, include that on your resume. Put that down. Once you have that, that certainly looks great on your resume to employers for future job and work opportunities. And I mentioned the ACTFL ILR scale, but there's also different scales. There's also, I think there's a specific one in Europe. I know that there's certain tests for different languages. Of course, including that, showing your scores, showing links, like Emilie mentioned, to something you're really proud of, something that's really impressive. Mm-hmm. That really helps for employers to get an idea of what you can do in that language, depending on this specific position. Maybe just to sign off, I'm not seeing any questions come through. Just to sign off, I was thinking perhaps we could just hear 1 or 2 sentences from each of you in Arabic to just encourage the learners, just maybe a quick message to learners who are either taking the language or thinking of taking the language. Some reinforcement, some encouragement. Maybe Jordan, I see you're unmuted. Can you start us off?
ايوه انا مبسوط انه انتوا جيتوا هون عشان تسمعونا، وانا بتمنى لكم كل التوفيق، وشيل حيلكم اتعلموا كتير عربي عشان بعدين تروحوا تعيشوا وتسافروا بالشرق الاوسط وتستمتع من الجو ومن الناس.
Shukran, Jordan. Sarah, maybe you could chime in.
I'll share my favorite expression in Egyptian, which is الكلاب في بطني بتحوحو, which means that the dogs in my stomach are barking because I am hungry, which is true for me almost always, but especially right now. And I thought it was actually funny when I learned that phrase. I started saying it a lot because I was constantly eating when I was in Egypt, and just in general as well. But one of my female Egyptian friends took me aside and she was like, you should say, I think it was asafir fi batni bitsusu, because that's, more than like, which I thought was hilarious. There's an expression for both males and females, but kilab are definitely, I think, a little bit more apt because I can never be eating enough, it feels like.
Emilie and Hayley, maybe quickly. I know that we just have a minute left. Go ahead, Emilie.
طيب بدي شجعكم شباب على إنه تسافروا وتتعلموا وتستمروا بالتعمق بهاللغة وبهالثقافة، وأكيد أمامكم فرص كتيرة وغنية جدا منشان تستمروا على هذا الطريق، وهي فعلا تجربة حلوة، وإن شاء الله تستمتعوا فيها وتضلوا تتعرفوا على ناس وتأكلوا كمان من هالأكل العربي المتنوع الممتاز اللي غير حياتي.
Shukran, Emilie. And Hayley, you can just end us here.
العربية دمرتني. It destroys me. أنا أموت العربي. I love Arabic so much. It destroys me and I die for it.
Shukran, Hayley. Shukran. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's career panel. And really, we hope that you enjoy the rest of the Global CRED Conference today for day 1 and day 2. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or follow-up questions with any of our lovely panelists or myself. And thank you, Linda, and thank you also to the Global CRED team for having us. Thank you so much. Ma salama.